So we're going to jump right in on this panel, and with me to my immediate right is Nancy Ancrum, who is the editorial page editor of the Miami Herald. You've been there in that position, I think, since 2013. Mm-hmm. So delighted you're here. The first time we've had the Herald participate, so a very warm welcome to you.
Thank you very much.
Natasha Bertrand is on her way. She should be here any minute. National security correspondent for Politico. Then what will be next to her is Matt Kaminski, her boss, who is global editor at Politico and previously editor-in-chief of Politico, and had been at the Wall Street Journal before that. And then last but not least is Jonathan Tepperman, editor-in-chief of Foreign Policy magazine. So delighted to have all three of you here. And Jonathan, a welcome to you. Matt has been here before, but a warm welcome to you as well. So I'm going to jump right in, and Natasha will join us when she arrives. And I want to start with the latest developments of this year, and that is the situation with Iran. And I wanted to ask each of you, maybe Jonathan, I'm going to start with you if you don't mind, and then we'll come back this way and then reverse the flow. How do you think the president has handled the situation with Iran?
Well, first of all, thank you, David, for having me here. Thanks to all of you for listening. I had a funny thought today, which I never expected to enter my head, which is if Iran doesn't respond any further than it has today, or yesterday, and if the United States, the Trump administration, doesn't respond beyond the extent to which it has already, this might actually turn out okay, which, like I said, was not something that I would have anticipated even a few days ago. The mistakes, I think, began at the very beginning. Trump acted without the approval of Congress, which is problematic. The legality of the strike was problematic. The timing of the strike was highly problematic. The administration keeps insisting that it was done because Soleimani was involved in an imminent attack. That's problematic for two reasons. One, because it's not like he was an actual bomb planter himself. Iran is a highly institutionalized country. He was a very good general, but one of many generals in a country's army. It's not like Iran is a terrorist organization where decapitating where killing one leader decapitates the organization. And there is no evidence that a terrorist attack was about to occur because the administration hasn't provided us with any evidence. There was also good reason to believe that it would lead to a rapid and very worrisome cycle of escalation between Iran and the United States that would quickly lead to war. And then the unexpected happened. Iran responded in a very restrained and moderate way, seems to have deliberately avoided casualties, both American and Iraqi. And the United States, Donald Trump, responded in a limited and restrained way for the moment. I think in part because what we're seeing in this whole episode is the two sides of Trump at war with one another. One is the side of Trump that favors belligerence at all moments and has to show that he's a bigger man than anybody else or whoever he's confronting. And the other is the side of Trump that's actually quite conflict averse and is determined not to get dragged into especially another bloody war in the Middle East, which he's convinced the American public wouldn't support. And so I think we've seen a vacillation between those two. But that's the best case scenario where we are right now. Things don't get any worse. But even if that happens, we're back where we were, say, toward the end of the Bush administration, where we have no nuclear deal. We have an extremely hostile Iran facing extremely hostile United States. The prospects for negotiations between the two, whatever Trump may think, are, I think, absolutely non-existent. And then, of course, the situation is not stable and is unlikely to remain where it is today. And part of Trump's promise in his speech yesterday was that he's going to start ratcheting up sanctions again. And if he does, that makes it extremely likely that the Iranians will find ways to, under their policy of extreme resistance in response to the American policy of extreme pressure, to start poking the United States again. And if that happens, then I think we're off to the races all over again.
Matt, how do you see it?
I would say, until proven otherwise, Trump is a master of two things, of messaging and of reading the public mood. I think with the end of, he's got a pretty simple sentence here. And I think the Democrats find themselves in a very difficult position right now to try and counter it. We killed a guy who's responsible for the deaths of thousands of Americans, potentially someone who's caused a lot of trouble in Iraq since 2003, saved Assad, is on one side of the war in Yemen. We killed a bad guy, period. I think that's going to work very well for him, assuming it doesn't get any worse. I actually don't see a contradiction between his move to sort of do what he did with Soleimani and then now step back. That again is a reading of the public mood. Americans are not going to. I mean, again, Soleimani is not as well known as Osama bin Laden, but I think the case has already been made that this was not something which anyone feels any regret over. If 6 months from now we're in a hot war in the Middle East and there are American soldiers dying there, yes, that would be 2005 Iraq war at its lowest point, but we're not there. So I think if you're sitting in the White House today, you're feeling pretty good about it.
Nancy, how do you see it? And maybe also, if you can give us a flavor of what your readers might be saying as well.
Well, our readers come down on both sides also, and I'm gauging that from our letters to the editor. And I think Trump has a couple of things going for him. I think American ignorance. Who was Soleimani? He was not on anyone's radar. I'm just talking about Americans in general. He was not Osama bin Laden. Yes, he had done a lot of damage, but over there. I think American forgetfulness. I think self-interest will rule as long as Matt and Jonathan both said, nothing escalates here. We will go back to, can I afford to pay the rent? Where's my health care insurance? All legitimate issues. And I think also forgiveness. We are a forgiving people also. I think the ball is in the Democrats' court now. He has Trump has played this well when we didn't think he was going to, but he's played it well as he plays other missteps well. And we now see, say, an Elizabeth Warren, who had the temerity to actually call Soleimani what he was, a terrorist, and a murderous terrorist, pulling back because the left is now saying you can't say anything that sounds complimentary to Trump. So the Democrats are going to have to find their voice, their backbone, their principles in this issue and beyond. Let's stick with the Democrats on this issue. How do you see this affecting, if at all, the Democratic primary, the nomination race? I don't. I really, really don't, unless, again, something big happens here.
Matt, how about
but I've had actually some of my colleagues in Iowa were saying how fascinating it's been to watch the Democratic debate play out. That you haven't had a traditional split between realists and interventionists, which you don't have that many Democrats anyway, but between isolationists. But that even Joe Biden, who can play the experience card, I think has been pushed by the strength of the progressive wing of the Democratic Party to take maybe a more hostile stance on this than he would otherwise do. So again, if you're sitting in the White House and the progressive wing of the Democratic Party is shaping the response on Soleimani, the way it's shaping the debate around Medicare for all and around a lot of other issues, suddenly it makes Trump go from being kind of a little bit off the mainstream, a little from more into the American mainstream, and in a strange way, the safer choice for Americans, which we would never thought we would be here at this point in the campaign.
And Jonathan, do you see it having an impact on the Democratic race? Does it play, for example, to the advantage of somebody like Buttigieg, who's served in the military?
Well, first of all, I agree that with Nancy, that if things stay where they are, the conflict doesn't escalate, then it's not going to be much of an issue going forward. And certainly not if the debate moderators don't ask about it, as they've tended to shy away from foreign policy questions. And if I don't see the campaign spontaneously making a big issue out of it, or a bigger one than they are. They are determined not to talk about foreign policy. I know this because I've reached out to every one of the campaigns to ask for interviews over the last 6 months, and I've been told by campaign managers and comms people at virtually every one of the campaigns, look, we know that at some point we're going to have to focus on foreign policy, but frankly, we really, really don't want to, and so we're not going to even do the work to engage until something forces our hand. And this, I don't think, on its own, is going to be the thing that forces their hand.
But I think Biden is sort of embracing this issue.
Sure.
This really plays to his strengths. This
And,
is where
I think that's right, and I think it also plays to Sanders' strength, because he has this very clear sort of left-wing isolationist, pacifist position. So it's a very clear issue for Sanders. It's a very clear issue for Biden. It has some potential for Buttigieg as well. But then for the others, it's too nuanced for them to make anything out of it.
Right, I think it was actually Sanders' clarity on this issue that rattled Elizabeth Warren into walking back her original and, I would say, on point assessment.
Could you also touch on the reaction and how this is playing with Florida's two senators, with the congressional members as well? How are they playing this? Is it along the lines that you described of a split?
Oh, absolutely. I think that they are solidly behind Trump and solidly behind what he did.
Scott.
Rubio and Scott, Marco Rubio and Rick Scott.
Right.
Yes.
Right. And do you see, all right, so if this issue is contained and it does not get any worse, are there, looking down the horizon, all three of you, are there foreign policy issues that could prove important, maybe not pivotal, in the election? Usually our elections are about the economy or things of that nature. Anything you could imagine that, on the foreign policy level, that is coming down the pike?
Nationally, it's not as clear, perhaps through the lens of immigration.
Yeah.
And how that continues to be handled or mishandled, depending upon what side you fall upon. Also in Florida, South Florida, Venezuela, and Cuba. Mm-hmm. To a far lesser degree, Haiti. But TPS is a foreign policy issue here. Mm-hmm.
I think, as we saw in that Pew results, China has been, and will continue to be what the Soviet Union was maybe 30 years ago in kind of focusing the conversation, not just about America's role in the world, but also what America is. It is this sort of power that is rising. Trump has been very successful in turning the narrative around China toward, we were quite, the markets, the business community was always very pro-China, and that has changed dramatically in the last 3 years. Mm-hmm. And it's not only Trump. I think you're seeing it from some of the rising Republicans, like Marco Rubio, Nikki Haley, who are focusing on China as an issue. And so I think that's the one that I think will be with us in this cycle and beyond.
Yeah, I mean, I think Matt is exactly right. As another slide on the Pew survey showed, American voters don't care about foreign policy qua foreign policy when it's called foreign policy. But what they do care about is economics and trade and terrorism, right? And so insofar as foreign policy is involved in both of those issues, and it certainly is in the trade war already, and if the conflict with Iran leads to terrorism in a way that affects Americans living within the United States, then that could make it a major issue in the campaign again.
And can I ask the two of you maybe just about Secretary Pompeo indications? I guess even he has said he is not planning to run for the Senate seat in Kansas. And there was an article describing Pompeo, I think it was Andrea Mitchell wrote, saying he is the most powerful Secretary of State in a long time. How would you describe the foreign policy process underway with a brand new national security advisor, also a pretty new Secretary of Defense?
Well, I think and you can tell me if you disagree, Matt, I don't have to give you permission, I know you'll do that anyways, that the starkest example of how things have changed is this memo that Trump purportedly got a few days ago, or a week or two ago, outlining the options for how to respond to the missile strike, the Iranian missile strike on the U.S. Iraqi base. That included option E, take out Soleimani. I think that option would not have been on the memo earlier in the Trump administration, because you had adults in the room, as everybody calls them. You had moderates, like responsible policymakers like McMaster, like Mattis, who were making sure that options like that were not getting to the president. As you know, I think many of you in this room who have served in government know, you don't put a crazy choice on a memo to your principal if you don't want your principal to take that decision. This was a decision that I think Pompeo very much wanted the president to take, and there was nobody with any stature equivalent to his to take it off the memo.
And Matt, hold on one second. So this chair is not for Elijah at Passover. It's actually for Natasha, Bertrand.
So was filing a story, I'm sure.
Exactly.
The scoop to land on the site.
Natasha, welcome to you.
Thank you.
Natasha Bertrand from Politico. Matt, go ahead. I won't ask you, Natasha, what you think of what's been said so far, but go ahead.
Appreciate it.
I think there's a sort of interesting parallel between the sort of early Obama years and later on. When Obama came in, he felt he needed adult supervision too. You had Clinton, you had a serious person at the Pentagon too, in sort of Gates and Panetta, and then he put people around him that he was comfortable with. Trump has done that sooner than Obama did. I think he seems to really like O'Brien, and Natasha would know better than I do. He has a good relationship with Pompeo and Esper. So he, for better or for worse, I think he's surrounded by people that he's both comfortable with and sees eye to eye with. I don't want to question my competitors' reporting on this, but there's been other reporting on that, that the Soleimani option did not just sort of come out of the box in middle of December, and is something that's been talked about for several months. And clearly Pompeo and Pence had been, bending his ear on this. So I guess, you can disagree with the decision, but it seems that in a way there's a more functional process. And whenever you use the word process in regard to the Trump administration, you should pause because it doesn't really apply often. But there seems to be sort of a semblance of a functional process around foreign policy that you may not have before, where you had that kind of committee of rivals around it.
Well, yes, but it's a highly determined process, right? With that leads in really one direction. So it is a certain kind of process, and certainly it is a process more in tune with the president's instincts and desires. But arguably it's not the best process because it's not presenting him with as many options as I think it did before.
Natasha, do you want to jump in on sort of the foreign policy decision-making process, Pompeo's role versus O'Brien versus Esper, and we haven't mentioned one other player, Mike Pence.
Yeah, so it's probably already been said here that Pompeo is probably the most powerful Secretary of State since Kissinger, right? I mean, he's kind of the defense secretary and the Secretary of State and the chief of staff kind of all wrapped in one. He's the person the president really trusts the most. Esper is beholden to Pompeo, and the same goes for the CIA director. Anyway, that's what we're told. And the idea of any kind of check on his worst impulses is moot at this point. I mean, O'Brien has been a yes man kind of through and through. He's not challenging him in a way that John Kelly used to, for example. So I think that's why people are kind of worried, especially if he gets reelected in 2020. Really the only check there's going to be on the president is Congress. And as we've seen, that really hasn't worked out so well. I mean, he was impeached, but how's that going to turn out in the Senate? Probably he's going to be acquitted rather quickly. So the amount of constraints that are on him at this moment are really weak. And I feel like the people that are surrounding him more and more obviously are more beholden to him and are more pro-Trump than they ever have been. So.
And I would say that it took him a while to get to this point. You know, the flip side is, I feel it's a little odd to say this, but what you set aside, there is suddenly some stability. He's not fighting with a Tillerson, he's not fighting with a Kelly. The revolving door of his inner circle seems to have slowed, if not stopped. There's a flip side here also to what remains worrisome.
You touched, Nancy, a little while ago on the issues of Cuba and Venezuela obviously being very important to people in this community. Could you maybe talk a little bit about how the administration has handled those issues and how you think it's seen here as well?
Well, I think that one reason, you know, we wrote an editorial last year where the headline called Marco Rubio, Trump's sycophant. Got a lot of page views. But I think that for all the antipathy between them during the campaign, as long as Rubio has Trump's ear on Venezuela and Cuba, that relationship, that reluctance for Rubio to actually really listen to his better angels here, if he still has them, will remain. But yes, Venezuela, it remains a very big issue here, as does Cuba. The lack of TPS being offered to Venezuelans who are already here really does stick in their craw, but I think that they will also be sticking with Trump.
And just on the Venezuela note, I mean, we're still seeing this kind of backdoor diplomacy happening. I mean, it's just come out in the Washington Post, that Rudy Giuliani was trying to make some kind of deal with Maduro. And I mean, this is fundamentally the issue with Trump's foreign policy, is that he has people around him that he really trusts that aren't necessarily in government, that don't have any like relevant experience, and he's going to rely on them always more than he does the people that, you know, his advisors who have, you know, what's left of them have relevant experience here. So
do you have an insight into the Pompeo-Giuliani dynamics? Because there were phone calls concerning Ukraine between the two, it appears. But given that Giuliani does seem to be playing on a number of issues that really would be the responsibility of the Secretary of State, do you have a sense of their dynamics?
Yeah, so Pompeo views Giuliani as a thorn in his side, and he views him as someone who he just has to deal with, because the president views Giuliani as kind of a security blanket. They've known each other for decades. They go back, you know, a long time to their New York days, and he knows that Giuliani is his most loyal soldier. So when Giuliani asked the State Department to look into allegations of corruption, you know, regarding Joe Biden, or, you know, tells the State Department, look, you really need to look at Masha Yovanovitch and what she's doing, Pompeo looks at that and says, okay, well, I guess we have to, because he's the president's personal lawyer and this is someone that he really trusts. Pompeo, of course, has not crossed the president and doesn't really plan to.
So, Matt, we've touched on a player who is has a central role in the impeachment controversy, and that is Rudy Giuliani. How do you see the impeachment process playing out? Could Iran, even if it is contained, have an impact on at least the timing of the process? Can you tease out for us how you think this might unfold?
Again, I've yet to meet a single person in this country whose mind has changed about Donald Trump as a result of the impeachment process. And that is the fundamental problem for the Democrats. I think Pelosi had to do what she did, partly because she had so much pressure from, and she's got a unified caucus. But I'm picking up a lot of buyer's regret on impeachment. You know, the candidates would just love to move on from the impeachment conversation. They don't see it as a win for them. And in Congress too, I think, you know, just look at the Trump fundraising numbers during the impeachment saga. You know, this has been a winner for him with his base, and it hasn't really been a winner with the Democratic base. And in terms of the way it turns out, I mean, you know, wake me up in 2 months and it'll be exactly the way I think it'll turn out, unless something crazy happens, and crazy things happen all the time. But it's so far been a pretty dull show because it's so predictable.
Jonathan, how take us a little broader on the impeachment issue, looking at how it's playing in the broader international stage?
So I think you have to make a distinction in answering the question between what other countries feel about impeachment and how it's affecting their behavior, or how it could affect their behavior. I think that there is such spectacular fear of and antipathy towards Donald Trump around the world that citizens of other countries and their leaders would be happy to see anything take this guy out, whether it's an election, impeachment, or a meteor strike. They don't, you know, they're not being picky. There was a poignant moment during Bill Clinton's impeachment trial, or the impeachment process, I don't remember what stage it was, when he went to the United Nations and got up before the General Assembly and gave a speech, and there was a spontaneous standing ovation from countries around the world. And this was interpreted, and I think rightly so, as a sign of global support for Clinton despite the impeachment. It's pretty hard to imagine the same thing happening today, and that's both because of the difference in the feelings towards the president and the stakes actually involved in the impeachment trial itself. As for whether it's going to actually change the way that anybody behaves, I think it depends on how the process plays out. If it continues long enough that countries feel like it's really distracting the president, and distracting the U.S. government, then and you know, potentially making Trump into a lame duck, then I think what we'll see is an acceleration of a process, frankly, that is not new, has been going on since the beginning of this administration, but was well underway before Trump became president, under the Obama administration as well, when much of the rest of the world felt like the United States was retrenching, was no longer interested in what was happening elsewhere, was no longer willing to come to the defense of friends and allies. And I say this is a perception rightly or wrongly, but I think it was real. And what that caused was a number of things. You saw allies starting to hedge their bets by cozying up or striking new deals with U.S. adversaries, China and Russia in particular. This is something that's happened dramatically in the last few years. One really striking example was Italy signing up for China's Belt and Road Initiative last year, but there have been lots of examples like this. You'll also see proxies, countries like Israel and Saudi Arabia continuing to take matters into their own hands and not worrying nearly as much as they did in the past about what Washington might think about what they're doing, because they'll feel like nobody's really paying attention. And I think you'll see U.S. adversaries like China and Russia feeling even less constrained in what they can do, because again, there will be the perception that the Trump administration isn't paying attention. And all of this, I think, leads up to a much more dangerous world.
Nancy, if you would bring it back home nationally, but also in Florida and here in Miami, how do you see the impeachment process playing out?
Again, I see the same divisions that we see with pick an issue. Mm-hmm. And again, just gauging from letters, from anecdotal conversations, Impeachment is either the right thing to do, it must happen, or this is a waste of time. We all know that you people hate Trump. It's just how it's playing out.
Natasha, what else is out there that hasn't come out yet that might weigh in on this? I mean, you've got John Bolton now saying he is willing to testify if subpoenaed by the Senate. Could that be something that would change the dynamics?
Potentially. I think it is unlikely right now that the Senate is going to subpoena John Bolton, and I think Bolton knows that. And I don't think that he's come up with a very good excuse for why he can testify before the Senate, but he can't testify before the House in the same impeachment trial. I think the real reason is because one is controlled by the Republicans, obviously. But I think, what we heard from Fiona Hill, the top Russia-Europe advisor on the NSC who left, during her impeachment testimony about John Bolton, about his opposition to what was going on, was really the thrust of what he could testify to, right? I mean, there were a few meetings that he was in with the president where he voiced his opposition to the hold on military aid, where he voiced his opposition to the drug deal that Rudy Giuliani and co. were kind of cooking up in Ukraine. But apart from that, it's still pretty unclear whether he would even delve into those conversations during a testimony, because executive privilege, which the president still has not exerted, but he could. So I think the possibility of more emails coming out, which is very real, could further endanger Trump as the Senate trial looms, because we know that there's something that they're hiding. I mean, the Office of Management and Budget is refusing to release roughly 20 emails between that office and a top aide to Mick Mulvaney about this Ukraine aid and the discussions that went on behind the scenes about the real rationale for it. So, as press outlets continue to FOIA for this stuff and more comes out about what the president was telling his advisors, what was happening, with regard to this hold on Ukraine aid, that's really the biggest piece of it, is the money. And that could, I think, have a big impact on public opinion, if not on Republicans in the Senate.
And Matt, is a drawn-out process, does that play to the benefit of the Republicans or the Democrats? How do you see the length of time that's involved?
I think my guess is that the Democrats would like to move on from this as soon as possible, primarily because this scandal is just so hard. It's a bit abstruse. Ukraine it's kind of hard to kind of get your hands around really what it is, why this really matters. So my guess would be that the Democrats would probably want to do this fast. And to the degree that sort of Trump can use this to really nurture that sort of martyr complex around, they're all out to get me. That is a very effective message with the kind of constituency that he needs to mobilize.
Jonathan, we're talking about the Hill, obviously, with involvement in impeachment. There were striking comments yesterday by Senator Paul and Senator Lee about the intelligence briefing provided about the situation in Iran. Do you see that as an aberration that otherwise Republicans are going to hold together when it comes to impeachment? Or is there sufficient frustration with the Iran situation that it could lead to some splits?
Boy, I don't see much evidence. I think that's wishful thinking.
I'm going to ask each of you to finish the following sentence. The Democratic nominee is going to be Nancy?
The Democratic nominee is going to be the person who can really I don't have a name. I do not have a name. I know, I do not have a name. I'm still waiting to be impressed. Who has a definitive, succinct message that resonates, one, with Democrats who do want to get rid of Trump, and two, with moderate Republicans who are also appalled and could use a change. Their message needs to be much more succinct than my answer to your question.
Yeah. If I had $1 million and said you could have this money if you correctly guessed who the Democratic nominee is going to be,
Oh, now a guess versus who
an educated guess.
I think it's Biden's to lose, but he needs to be careful. He needs to up his game and not dodder. And I don't mean to sound ageist, but let's face it.
Natasha, you don't get $1 million. I just want an answer.
I'll give you an answer.
I'm not in the prediction game anymore after 2016. But I do think it's Biden's to lose. But, you know, don't sleep on Warren. Buttigieg, I'm not a political reporter per se, but speaking to my colleagues about it, I mean, he really has a huge shot here. And yeah, I could go on. I could make a case for actually any one of them, probably. Even Andrew Yang, to be honest, but.
Her answer was as long as mine.
I was going to say.
Okay, you're right.
Matt, can you give me a succinct answer?
Okay, boomer. It'll definitely be someone in their 70s. Probably not okay, Bloomberg. If we judge candidates, but who's the most appealing on television, or who sort of gets your attention, Yang and Buttigieg, wow, that's like you sort of keep the channel on. You sort of want to watch what they say. When we were at that debate in LA, it was like when sort of Yang kind of stole the show, and Buttigieg is really, really good. I think Yang is too much of an outlier, and Buttigieg is really too young, and it's too early. So we're going to have another president who should be retired, probably.
Jonathan?
You know, it's torture to put a bunch of journalists up on stage and give them microphones.
Tell me about it.
And then ask them to give short answers. I also need to caveat this by saying I have an unbroken record of guessing these things wrong. And so I think I will be doing a disservice to whatever candidate's name comes out of my mouth, because I'll be guaranteeing that they then don't get the nomination. It's like the kiss of death. You see how I'm eating up minutes here?
Yeah.
All that said, I don't think that the debates are having much impact on most voters, and so I think that the structural the underlying factors will dominate, and so I think it's going to be Biden and probably, if he's smart, Biden and Klobuchar.
There is an interesting sort of dynamic of the race.
You have more of an answer?
No, but I wanted to add, maybe so amplify what Jonathan's point, maybe, is that Biden has had a pretty good 2 months. He's also had a pretty good 12 months. He's been pretty much in the same place in the polls since the beginning of this. He's been written off. My colleague John Harris had a great column called Grandpa Simpson Runs for President. It was about sort of Biden's photos, but he stuck around, and more recently he seems more there. He hasn't made that many mistakes, and he's sort of getting into it. And I think Warren is probably fading, which is it'd be amazing if you had a Bernie Sanders Biden runoff.
I'm going to ask one more question, and then we're going to go to the audience for questions. Let me ask you, Nancy, we'll start with you. Donald Trump is reelected. What kind of foreign policy would you expect?
Scorched earth?
Scorched earth. That was a short answer.
Well, I think any president is unleashed, is loosey-gooseier during that second term, assuming that he's not going to go for a third term or attempt it. And so I think that, but I also think he will probably, even Trump will be worried about legacy. It will be interesting to see what transpires during a second term with Kim Jong-un.
Mm-hmm.
Natasha?
Yeah, no, as I was saying earlier, I think it'll be unconstrained. Really all he cares about is winning. So, without the prospect of having to win another election, I think that he'll be even more impulsive. We've seen that he doesn't exactly stick to the promise of being, more isolationist, wanting to pull out of the Middle East. Pretty much he's completely turned that on his head, so we can't really trust anything he says about his foreign policy at this point, whatever that may be. So it's hard to predict, but as I said, again, I think that Congress will really be the only check on him. And unless, I mean, they voted just hours ago the House did anyway, on the War Powers Resolution. So seeing how that plays out will be interesting, but I don't think, what part of the thing that is interesting to me is that our allies are preparing for a Trump win. They are not going to be caught flat-footed again. If you talk to diplomats around the world, they're like, we are preparing for Trump to win re-election no matter what. We are not going to be caught off guard. So they're making plans too for what that's going to look like. It's really anyone's guess at this point.
Before moving to Matt and Jonathan, let me just ask you, do you anticipate the Senate would vote on the War Powers Resolution? It would not pass it, would it?
No, I don't think it would. I mean, there are a few Republicans that have signaled that they're on board, but getting enough is going to be tough, yeah. Okay.
John, Matt, sorry.
I would see it through a prism of what I'm trying to describe as a kind of Trump paradox. He is on the one hand the most rash, and it's an opaque, chaotic process, yet we're arguably experiencing the most transparent presidency we've ever had. We sort of know what's on his mind almost instantly. Even the thing that we thought was devious, the Ukraine scandal, that came out very fast, and we know most of the details again, pretty soon after. The other paradox is, I do think Trump is checked by primarily by public opinion. I think he is very sensitive to sort of reading the national mood and reacting to it. Got a bunch of Iranians at our embassy. I'm not going to repeat Benghazi. Everyone remembers Tehran. I'm going to hit him, and then I'm going to step back because no one wants a repeat of the Iraq War. The other part of this paradox, I guess, is that he is kind of rash in his communications, but he's not that rash in his actions. There's some things, the Ukraine thing was rash. You can argue about Soleimani, but in general, there is a case to be made that if you had another Republican president, let's say Jeb Bush, who again, the public mood would be completely different, but I would say that 75% of the policies and the judicial appointments would be exactly the same. Trump is not such a big risk taker. I don't know if you remember the campaign when there was this firework went off or something, or someone took a bag and popped it. He kind of ducked really quickly. He's not a profile in courage, I guess, or not known as one. So I guess I would not think that necessarily it would be kind of El Dorado in the Trump second term, just based on how he has behaved in his first term.
Jonathan? And let me just say, if folks want to ask questions, the microphones, one's there, please line up for them.
I see medical science making enormous leaps forward because the effort to keep Ruth Bader Ginsburg alive will become so preoccupying for so many people that I think we'll see enormous advances in extending human life in the next 4 years. But apart from that, it will be sheer and total. Can you swear on C-SPAN, or is that not allowed? No, mayhem, and the levels of self-dealing, I think, will grow exponentially. But I agree with what Nancy said, that I think Trump will start looking for his legacy, and I agree with what Natasha said, that a lot of the things that he talks about, he doesn't actually care about. What he does care about, and we've seen this all through his career, and we've seen this throughout his presidency, is making deals. So I think we will see him really start swinging for the fences on every area where there is a deal possible. And in some cases, that may turn out to be a good thing. We may see deals, possibly with China, that resemble the template set by the U.S. Mexico-Canada Act, which was essentially just a rehash of NAFTA, not very different, and that in fact improved on NAFTA in areas of trade protection, in the worker protections and some other areas. So deals like that Trump can, for lack of a better word, trumpet as a big accomplishment, but don't represent something new. But then I think there is a real danger that in his desperation to sign a deal with, say, North Korea, he gives away far, far too much in exchange for far too little.
Okay, let's go to questions. We're going to take two at a time. If you'd say who you are and try to keep it brief, if you would.
Okay. Hi, my name is Roberto Velez. I'm an accounting major here at FIU. Before I ask my question, I do want to add, because you guys were discussing about Cuba and Venezuela, I also think that the crisis currently in Nicaragua is something that's very important to talk about, and that's going to affect a lot of future U.S. foreign policy, and it is going to affect, I think, a lot of elections here in South Florida in 2020 when candidates and elected officials bring more attention to it. In terms of my question, and I know you guys talked about this a little bit, but I wanted to kind of expand on it. When we're talking about the impeachment trial, specifically in the Senate, do you think that that will sway the Senate majority? Will it swing back to the Democrats? I'm saying this because I'm thinking of people like Senator Cory Gardner of Colorado. If he votes to acquit Trump, that's not really going to help him a lot in a blue state like Colorado. And then also people like Susan Collins in Maine, that probably could affect her reelection potential.
Okay, thank you. Andrew.
Hi, Andrew Duncan. I'm a film producer and Chinese human rights activist. My question is in regards to the Iran situation, which you touched on. Last week there were war games with Moscow, Beijing, and with Tehran that have been underreported or non-reported by the Washington Press Corps. And China's been, Beijing specifically, and I like to say the Chinese Communist Party, who are 90 million people, totalitarian rule over 1.3 billion people, not just China. They are breaking sanctions against Iran every day and supporting the Iran regime, buying Iranian oil at a discounted price. And we're about to sign a trade deal next week with them with 3 million, the Pentagon reports up to 3 million Uyghurs being held in concentration camps and a quarter of the world's cotton supply being picked by these people in concentration camps. How come people in the Washington Press Corps aren't holding the administration account on that? And it seems like it's the parlor game and not the substance a lot of the time. Thanks.
Okay. Who wants to address these?
Can I respond to that?
Yeah, sure.
Well, we at Foreign Policy did cover the war game last week, and we in Foreign Policy have been covering the detention and concentration camps of the Uyghurs consistently, including the way that the situation in China is now tainting supply chains in all sorts of different industries, and you cited cotton, but there are others as well. So the information is out there. I think in order to have change, or the situation won't change unless till the U.S. government gets seized with the issue, and under this administration that's not likely to happen. But great pressure can come from corporate America as well, and that tends to happen when consumers force corporate America to take these issues seriously. So that's what I would hope for.
On the Senate trial, I guess I would, he's not going to get convicted unless something dramatically changes, and I can't, and because the issue hasn't really taken off the way that I think Nancy Pelosi would have hoped it had taken off, I don't think it'll be the sort of litmus issue for any of for Susan Collins, where she might be tempted to vote to convict, or Cory Gardner to do something else that he might otherwise have done.
Natasha, Nancy, do you want to?
Yeah, no, I agree with Matt. I think Cory Gardner is certainly one to watch, as is Susan Collins, Mitt Romney, but ultimately it's good politics for them to say, well, you know, this is going to be a fair trial and I want to hear witnesses and I want to see documents. Ultimately, there's no evidence that they're actually going to break with the majority.
Okay, we're back over here and then there. Go ahead.
Hi. My name is Ernesto Antunes, and I'm a political science major here at FIU. My question and concern regards Iran. Let's say we were to shift our thinking and accept the fact that we've been in a de facto state of war with Iran since 1979. Would that solve many of the questions regarding the Soleimani strike?
Okay, over there.
Thank you. My name is Alexander Rubito from the Model United Nations program here at FIU, and my question is in regards to the impeachment in the House, the perception among the American public of a speedy and rushed impeachment. How do you think that that's going to play out in re-election for the House Democrats and maintaining their majority?
Do you want to?
Right, in terms of questions surrounding the Soleimani killing, I would have to say I'm not sure how many outstanding questions there still are. I think that there is, or there should be, agreement that this was a very bad actor. This drone strike really didn't just fall out of the sky last week. This has been a long building march. It has been under discussion. I think that we need to understand who Soleimani truly is beyond being the terrorist, being the murderer. We have actually, you talked to Ryan Crocker. I haven't talked to Ryan Crocker, but they actually work together in trying to bring a stable government to Afghanistan. And so he was a complicated person. I'm not sure, though, what further outstanding questions there are about him.
Natasha, do you want to come on the House?
Yeah. I don't think that if you talk to any Democrat, they would tell you that impeachment was good politics for them. They understand that, especially with the moderate Democrats, that, this was a tough decision to go down this road. And ultimately, their hand was forced by the fact that the day after Robert Mueller testified about Russia's election interference and about all of the contacts that the Trump campaign had with the Russians, what did Trump do? He got on the phone with the Ukrainian president and basically invited him to interfere again in 2020. So that was really what Nancy Pelosi says, is that was really the straw that broke the camel's back. They could not ignore this anymore. The Judiciary Committee efforts to try to kind of slow walk an impeachment process without calling it impeachment never took off. And once this happened, that's when all of the momentum and all of the steam was really gained in the Democratic caucus for moving forward on this, because they couldn't justify not doing it anymore. And the rationale, I think, for having the process be the way it was, with back-to-back hearings. First you had the private depositions, and then you had it out in the open, and it all seemed to move very quickly, was, again, this question of, well, at the time it was urgency. This is a guy who poses a national security threat. We're coming up on the 2020 election. If we don't hold him accountable, then how will he be held accountable? What precedent will this set for the future? And I think, Nancy Pelosi, unfortunately, has given the other side a little bit of ammunition here by holding on to the articles of impeachment for as long as she has, because it kind of undermines the argument that this really is urgent, which is what the Democrats had been messaging for the last couple months. So, it remains to be seen how this is going to play out in 2020 for Democrats, but I don't think any of them would tell you that this is something they did because they thought it would help them win re-election.
Okay, let's go to this side first and then over here.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Francisco Sanguino. I'm a freshman here at FIU, and my question is mainly directed towards Mr. Tepperman. You very briefly mentioned Klobuchar as a feasible candidate for the presidential election in 2020. I've particularly noticed that when asked, many analysts say that she doesn't have enough national traction or funding to be anywhere near close to like a potential candidate. So what about her, and as one of the few remaining moderates on the campaign trail, makes you see her as a good candidate?
I'm sorry, you asked about
Klobuchar.
Klobuchar.
Oh, hold on, Jonathan. Hold on. Let me get one more right over here. Go ahead.
Hello and good evening. My name is Leanne Cabrera. I am a student here at FIU, currently studying international relations.
Come a little.
And right here?
Yep,
okay.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And my question kind of is more geared towards getting a more understanding of what Americans actually value, because right now, if it's about record, in my personal opinion, I think Bernie Sanders has the best record compared to Elizabeth Warren or Joe Biden. And then when you compare the whole age aspect, I do understand that it does feel like there's a huge divide in the American public right now, and as well as in foreign policy. It feels like we're on the same page where we want to take care of our American soil first, but it kind of feels like one tends to be more, let's cut immigration, let's do all these retractive processes, and then the other feels more, let's take up our infrastructure and more inward policies. So my question is kind of geared towards more getting into that. What do the American people care about right now? Thank you.
Okay. You had a Klobuchar question.
Sure. On Klobuchar, I think she's a smart pick for Biden for a number of reasons. She balances the ticket in terms of gender and age, but she's also a very, well, first of all, philosophically, she's fairly close to Biden in that she's a moderate, and certainly has moved in that direction as the campaign has gone on. But like Biden, she also has strong appeal in purple areas. She has a very good record of winning elections by a strong margin in areas that are not safe Democratic territories. And that's something that the Democrats need, that Biden's needs, so that they can win back Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and other areas in the election.
And she had a breakthrough performance at the last debate,
Yeah.
you know, when she had tended to be a little bit stiff and spoken. I think she kind of relaxed. The smaller stage suited her well. And some people thought she's a credible candidate. I think it's hard to imagine she can get the nomination, but you're absolutely right that she becomes very appealing as a VP pick. I think to the question, the other question maybe I can address, the one opinion survey number that's kind of stuck in my mind the last couple of weeks was what percentage of Americans feel positively about the economy. In 2016, that was, I think, 47%. Today, it's 76%. You know, for all the noise and chaos that the Trump presidency has kind of generated, the fact of the matter is that only a small minority and a fairly unrepresentative group of people are obsessed with cable television, whether it's MSNBC or Fox. Most people live and are not consumed by politics day to day, but they look around, you know, how are things? Well, things are pretty good. You know, my 401k is up 20%. Unemployment's at 3%. The country is generally at peace, the Soleimani thing notwithstanding. So I think, you know, there's constituencies that have certain things they really care about a lot, but generally the mood is good, and I think that is just naturally favors the incumbent always still. And this is where Trump is actually more of a conventional president than I think we maybe realize.
Okay, with apologies, I only have time for one more, and I'm gonna go to the gentleman right there, so my apologies, sir. Last question.
Okay, thank you so much for being here. My name is Brian Escalona, and I am here for the Modern United Nations team from the Florida International University. And my question goes back to the Iranian conflict. In terms of what the attacks that they had in the military base in Iraq, you know, we don't really know how the U.S. will respond. However, if in the case that the U.S. retaliates, which nations do you believe will enter the picture? Will Hezbollah come in? Saudi Arabia, Israel? Which nations will come into the picture in terms of this conflict? And what will undergo in the case that the U.S. retaliates?
Who wants to handle that one? Go ahead.
I mean, I do think that Iran is a fundamentally weak state in the region. That's why it you know, has to use asymmetric means. There are not many natural Iranian allies. The Chinese will complain, but they'll be happy to see the U.S. enmeshed in something that would be costly and distracting, but aren't going to, you know, support the Iranians. Same goes for the Russians. And when you look around the region, you know, all the Sunni states, their sworn enemy is Iran, and I just find it that the kind of the World War III scenario that's been thrown around in the media the last week and a half or so, it's a fun thing to sort of have trend on Twitter, but it's quite hard to really game out how that would come about, because I just don't see what the other side looks like.
Can I just add
Sure.
to that quickly?
Yep.
I agree with everything that my esteemed colleague just said, but that doesn't mean the conflict has to be an existential one. And the Iranians, precisely because of their weaknesses, have proved to be very, very good at finding ways to strike the United States and damage its interests through proxies, and with just enough deniability that it doesn't lead to a frontal reprisal from the United States. And what concerns me, and should concern all of us, is that the United States is highly, highly exposed throughout the region. We have something like 100,000 troops throughout the broader Middle East. We have allies like, or close friends like Israel and Saudi Arabia, which are highly vulnerable. There are oil installations that the Iranians can attack, but the Iranians have also gotten very good at cyber. And that is an area where there is no doctrine, no deterrence. It's a virtually ungoverned area of warfare. And then finally, I think the most likely response is that the Iranians will continue escalating and will restart with vigor their nuclear weapons program. And that is something that, while it may not lead to World War III, is something that really should concern us all very much.
So in my final minute, because I didn't learn the first time I tried this, I'm going to try again. After the election in November, the U.S. president is going to be, the winner is going to be...
Isn't that the same question?
No. I asked you who the Democratic nominee was going to be. I clearly didn't learn the lesson that you don't want to answer these questions, but try again. All right, Tepperman.
Okay, so remember how I said that I have an unbroken record of always calling it wrong Victor, and I feel bad because the name that's going to come out of my mouth is guaranteed not to be the person who wins the election? Donald J. Trump.
I will stick by my original answer, David, that a baby boomer is going to win it.
Thank you. That's so helpful. Natasha.
I think Trump.
Yeah, I'm thinking Trump.
Okay. All right. I got an answer from each of you. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Nancy, Natasha, Matt, and Jonathan. Terrific panel. And let me just say that we are going to transition. We're going to do it quickly. So there is coffee and water over there. Please let the panelists go to the back of the room so that they can take their mics off and give it to the next panel. And so I'll ask my colleagues to exit that way. Thank you so much.